Chapter 9. The Woods Surprise. "Are you Peter Hollister?" asked the bicycle man in amazement. "Yes," the children chorused. And when Mr. Hollister said that indeed Pete was the owner of the bike, the man scratched his head and exclaimed, "No wonder I got such a bargain." "What do you mean?" Mr. Hollister asked. "I bought this bike a couple days ago," the man said. "A rough-looking fellow rode it here. He seemed to be in a terrible hurry and offered to sell me the bike for $3. "What did he look like?" Pete asked excitedly. "Well, he was very tanned and wore rough clothes. There was something funny about him. Let's see, what was it?" "His hat?" Ricky asked excitedly. "Yes, that's it. He had a queer little red hat." "That's the thief," Pete said. Then Mr. Hollister and Pete explained to the man how the small moving van had been robbed of all their toys. The bicycle man said thoughtfully. "I'm sorry to hear that. I guess I'll have to give you the bike." Mr. Hollister said he did not want the man to lose the $3 he had paid for the bicycle. "Tell you what I'll do," the man said. "I'll charge you $3 to rent these bikes, and that'll even things up." "Fine," Mr. Hollister agreed, "and I'll tell the police about this at once. It may help them catch the thief." Pete was mighty glad to have his bicycle back, and he hoped he never would lose it again, but just in case, he put the note around the bulb once more before screwing it in. The family set off for the picnic spot. What an exciting ride! They went uphill and down, and when the children coasted down the little knolls ahead of their parents, they shouted and yipped like a bunch of cowboys. The Hollisters passed several groups of picnickers. All of the fireplaces seemed to be in use. After a ride of about 20 minutes, the Hollisters coasted into a little valley. After rumbling over a tiny bridge, Holly spotted another picnic grove. It was well shaded by tall trees, and a little brook gurgled alongside it. "It's a swell place," Ricky shouted. "I'll bet Indians used to camp here." Mrs. Hollister agreed that they might have, and suggested that Ricky try looking for Indian arrowheads. They all got off their bicycles. Pete ran to a pile of wood alongside the stone fireplace. With Pam helping him, he soon had a fire roaring under the grate. Then Mrs. Hollister opened the picnic baskets. "Yikes!" Ricky shouted. "Frankfurters!" He wanted to nibble one right away, but his mother said he must wait until they'd been roasted over the fire. In the meantime, he could gather twigs. "May I cook the Franks?" Pam asked, reaching for the string of frankfurters. "All right," Mrs. Hollister said. "I'll get a knife and cut them apart." She had not gone far, and Pam was looking at the fire when she felt a yank on the string. Turning, she saw a big brown dog with the frankfurters in his mouth. He ran off, dragging the string of them behind him. "Stop!" Pam cried out, racing toward him. "Drop those!" The dog ran into the woods, with Pam going pell-mell after him. He scampered through bushes and around tall trees. Pam lost sight of him twice, but came upon the animal again on the banks of the little stream. He was sitting on his haunches, devouring one of the frankfurters. When he saw Pam, he started to growl. "Oh dear, what'll I do?" Pam thought. By now the dog had a second one in his mouth. "I must get them back." As she went closer to the animal, He growled louder, but Pam bravely reached down and grabbed one end of the string and pulled hard. The angry dog pulled at the other end. Finally, one of the links broke, and both the dog and Pam tumbled backwards. The dog had only 2 frankfurters, and Pam had 10. When the animal saw this, he leaped toward the girl. Screaming, Pam raced away from him, but the dog gained on her with every step. "He'll bite me," Pam thought wildly. "I must do something quick." Up ahead she saw a tree with a low branch. She leaped up and swung onto it just as the dog lunged for her. As fast as she could, Pam climbed to the upper branches, still clinging to the frankfurters. The dog stood under the tree, jumping and barking furiously. Pam cried out for help, but her family was a long way off. How long would the dog stay under the tree? Suddenly she heard a voice nearby. "I'll get him, young lady." Out of the tree stepped a park policeman waving a club. He smiled up at Pam. Then he ran toward the dog, chasing him out of sight. Pam climbed down. As she reached the ground, her family came running up. "I saved most of them," Pam cried, holding up the frankfurters. "Only 4 missing." She told her story, and the others gasped. "You're real brave," Holly said. "But I'm still hungry." They hurried back to the picnic spot, and the boys roasted the frankfurters after washing them. When they had finished eating, the children gathered up the scraps and put them into a big container. "Let's play games," Pete suggested. Holly said she would like to play giant steps, so the children did this. "I'm going to hunt for arrowheads," Ricky said after a while. He disappeared into the thick pine trees, but in a few minutes came rushing back. He was holding his finger to his lips. "Shh," he whispered. "Don't make any noise. I found something wonderful." "What?" The little boy did not reply. He merely motioned the others to follow him. On tiptoes they walked behind Ricky. Soon they came to a clearing in the woods. In the middle of it stood a baby deer. "Oh, isn't it cute?" Holly whispered. Just then there was a rustling in the bushes. A big mother deer stepped out into the clearing and walked toward her baby. She nuzzled the fawn gently. "She's kissing her baby," Sue said. With that, the deer looked up and saw the Hollisters. But she did not run. "They must be tame ones," Pam observed as the deer gazed at them with their lovely brown eyes. "Sure they are. I was patting them," confessed Ricky. Slowly the children walked toward the deer and finally patted them. "Can you ride a deer?" Ricky asked, thinking how nice it would be to bound around on one of the pretty animals. "I don't think so," Mr. Hollister said. "Although far away in Lapland, little Lap children sometimes ride on reindeer." Ricky decided to try this. He leaped on the mother deer's back, but instead of getting a ride, he was tossed off. Both deer were dashed away into the woods. After Ricky picked himself up, the Hollisters returned to the picnic grove and took another ride before pedaling back to the park entrance. "Did you have fun?" the bicycle man asked as he put the bikes into the racks. "Super," Pam said, and told of their adventures. The empty picnic basket and Pete's bike were put into the back of the station wagon. Then the Hollisters set off toward Shoreham. By the time they came to their street, it was growing dark. Sue had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, and everyone was tired. As they neared their house, The Hollisters were startled at what they saw. Pete cried out, "A searchlight shining on our house!" "There's a police car!" Mr. Hollister exclaimed. "Goodness!" Mrs. Hollister said. "What has happened?" When the station wagon stopped in the driveway, the children's father hopped out and ran toward the car. A young policeman was sitting in it. "What's going on, officer?" Mr. Hollister asked. The policeman stepped from the car and introduced himself, saying he was Cal Newberry of the Shoreham Force. "We got a call that there was a prowler around your house, Mr. Hollister," he said. "The sergeant and I came out to investigate. He's around back looking now." Just then from the rear yard came the police sergeant, accompanied by Mr. Hunter, the father of Jeff and Ann. Mr. Hunter explained that he had seen a man walking around the house just as it was growing dark and called the police, but the sergeant could find nobody. "Too bad Zip wasn't here to guard the house," Pete said. "I think we'd better look around once more," the sergeant said. The Hollisters and Officer Cal joined in the search. They looked under the bushes and behind the trees, then tried the doors of the house. Suddenly, Peter shouted, "Look, Dad! The cellar window is open a little." This window was concealed by a low bush, and the sergeant had not noticed it. "Maybe Joey broke in to get the cats," Pam said. Quickly, Mr. Hollister unlocked the front door. The children raced to the cellar. There in the corner lay White-Nose and the kittens. "Oh, I'm so glad," Holly said happily. Meanwhile, Officer Cal was examining the ground outside the cellar window. He called in. "There are some footprints here," he said. "Small ones?" Pete asked. "No, they are a man's prints." Mr. Hollister explained about the prowler who had been bothering them since they moved to Shoreham. "We'll keep an eye on this place," the policeman said. "I'll drive past here a couple times every night until this mystery is cleared up." The children hurried upstairs and walked with the policeman to his car. Nice Officer Cal turned off the searchlight, said goodbye, and the car started off. As the children returned to the house, the hall lamp made a path of light. In it, Pam spied a piece of cloth lying half hidden beneath a big azalea bush. She picked it up. "Here's a clue!" she cried, hurrying into the living room where her parents were. "Why, it's a handkerchief," her mother replied. Pam held up a large red one for the others to see. "It's a workman's handkerchief," Pete said. "You know who has one like it?" "Who?" Ricky asked. "Roy Tinker. I saw one in his back pocket at the store the other day." "Roy Tinker," Mr. Hollister said. "Jeepers, Dad," Pete remarked. "Do you suppose Tinker is the prowler?"